Thank you for tuning in to Change and Thrive. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, founder and CEO of WH Consulting and Learning Solutions. Don't forget to subscribe. That way, you'll never miss an episode. We know change is hard. It can be frightening. Organizations struggle with it. However, how we have framed change management is incorrect. Because the truth is, it isn't about change management. It's about transition leadership. And as a change management expert who's been doing this work for nearly 30 years, I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of change management, all of which was amplified during COVID. Last month, I shared some key frameworks that have helped organizations and transition leaders thrive during change. We discussed jump-starting teams and team performance, talent retention, change agility, and learning agility. Today, we're going to discuss leadership agility. Did you know that 70% of all large-scale change initiatives fail? I could go into the various reasons why, but today I'd like to discuss what makes the 30% successful. The truth is, there's a pattern in organizations that have successfully implemented change. Their leaders are equipped to lead the effort. Kotter himself acknowledges this gap, calling for greater emphasis on change leadership and noting that almost nobody is very good at it. During the last 30 years, I've identified which factors differentiate those 30% of the organizations who are successful, and I'd like to share a couple of those key principles with you. 1. Organizations who are successful at implementing change examine its impact on 3 fundamental levels: the impact to the organization, the impact to teams, and how it impacts individuals. 2. Prior to embarking on fundamental change, organizations examine the risk factors of the change and proactively put mitigation strategies in place to address those within their control. 3. Organizations who are successful monitor their plans and recalibrate quickly. Successful change execution is a marathon, not a sprint. So when you start to embark on a change journey, think about what those checkpoints are along the way so you can make adjustments as you need to. And the 4th, most important factor is successful organizations really spend the time on their leaders and prepare them to lead their teams through transition. Without good transition leadership, you will fail. I want to take a minute and talk about change versus transition. Change is something that happens to you. It is done to you. You have very little control over it. Your company could merge, it could downsize. Look at how COVID forced organizations to drastically change how they operate. Transition is an individual's response to the change. It is deeply personal. It is how they personally work through the issues and get from point A to point B. And it is the leaders who play the pivotal role in guiding their teams, shepherding them, and helping them to understand what is happening and what the change means and what they have to do to get to the other side. Transition leadership is what we're talking about. In my work with organizations who are undergoing fundamental change, I created a framework to account for the 2 primary change failures. First, lack of effective implementation planning, and second, lack of leaning into the role of the leader and equipping them to guide their teams through transition. This is the basis of my book, Change and Thrive, a modern approach to change leadership. I've had the opportunity to work with some amazing leaders, and it's those leaders that take the approach that their teams need to be committed and on board and internalize these changes even before they can step up and help their teams. That's really the first phase of the 5C's of transition leadership, which is the model introduced in the book. For example, My team and I were working with an organization last year during the pandemic that was going through a fundamental transformation of their commercial model. We guided this leader to rally his direct reports and spend the time via Zoom ensuring that each of the leaders understood the why behind the transformation, committed it to it, and could articulate it to their people. That was really the first step along the road to successful change. Commit to owning the change and preparing to lead. The second piece of the 5C's model is construct. As you undergo any type of change, there are risks. There are risks to your people. There are risks to your customers. So in the case of the transformation, we worked with this leader to engage his team to identify the most important risks which were under their control. And they developed mitigation strategies to shepherd and lead their teams through the transition. That's where the proper planning comes in. The third C is about creating high-performing teams to deliver results. One of the things we find far too often is leaders are not allowed the time to work with their teams, or they see it as a one and done. During a fundamental organizational change, as in the case of the transformation, there is often a new composition of leaders and new team members. Leaders need to guide their teams through the transition process. They need to align around the vision and what the strategy means to their work. But you also need to get these teams up and running quickly so they can start to perform. So it's not only what they have to do. A great transition leader works with their team to discuss the how they're going to work together, forming their operating norms and agreements. During this company's transformation, it was extremely challenging because all the leaders had to jumpstart their teams virtually. They couldn't get together in a meeting room and work it out and spend time together face to face. The leadership team needed to have a deliberate approach for how to tackle the virtual challenge. They executed this flawlessly because they invested the time in proper planning, and the payoff was huge. The fourth C is coaching direct reports through the transition. Transition coaching is critical to an organization's success. So what does it look like? You work individually with your direct reports and pinpoint specific transition challenges. You then help your employees by putting a plan in place to close those specific gaps. This is not the time for performance or development coaching. It's all about transition coaching. And during this transformation, this group of leaders across the organization spent time to meet with each of their direct reports over Zoom. They discussed what each person needed and put a personal transition plan in place. The last piece, the last C, is Calibrate. This means putting check steps in place to track progress of the transition. The organization who went through the transformation this summer made sure they put metrics in place so they could monitor their progress. Essentially, at the end of the day, leading through transition is a pretty simple process. It's important to keep your eye on the prize and focus on solid implementation planning and equipping your leaders to guide their teams through transition. Change doesn't need to be a dirty word. In fact, it can ignite great things in people. You just need to be prepared. So, by following the change journey roadmap and the role of the transition leader, and utilizing the tools and techniques which we share in our book, organizations not only can manage through change, but they can thrive during change. If your organization is starting to go through change, and you need to equip your leaders to be excellent at transition leadership, please reach out to us, for we have an on-demand learning solution that works at all leadership levels. You can check it out at changeandthrive.org. Thank you again for allowing me to share my insights, and for tuning in. I'm your host, Dr. Wendy Heckelman, and I will see you next week.